You cannot break a spirit that has already survived the worst storms the world has to throw at it. Join us for the epic tales of modern-day titans who rose from the ruins to claim their victory. Click subscribe now and find your own unbreakable spirit today. The day my cousin's girlfriend shoved me into a metal shelving unit and left me bleeding on the concrete floor of our family storage unit, my cousin Marcus didn't call an ambulance. He didn't kneel down beside me. He looked at me for exactly 3 seconds, then walked out the door and drove away. I lay there with a 6-inch gash across my forearm, watching his taillights disappear through the rolling metal door, thinking this is the same person I taught to ride a bike. This is the person I lent $40,000 to. This is the person my grandmother made me promise to look after before she passed. I pulled myself up with one arm, grabbed my keys with my good hand, and drove myself to urgent care. And when he texted me 4 hours later, "You always make everything about yourself. Give Sierra some space. We need you to back off." I read it twice, set my phone face down on the hospital bed, and thought very carefully about the cosigner agreement sitting in my email drafts. I replied one word: fine. Then I made 3 phone calls that changed everything. I need to back up, because this doesn't make sense without the context, and the context is the kind of thing that sounds unbelievable until you realize how slowly it happened. My name is Dana. I'm 31 years old. I'm a physical therapist at an outpatient clinic in Charlotte, and for the past 2 years, I have been the primary financial backstop for my cousin Marcus and his girlfriend Sierra, a woman I had met exactly twice before she moved into his apartment, and decided that I was, in her words, a resource they hadn't fully utilized yet. I want to be fair. Marcus and I grew up more like siblings than cousins. His mom and my mom were sisters, inseparable, and when his mother passed away from a stroke when Marcus was 19 and I was 22, something shifted in me. I became his emergency contact, his reference, the person he called when his car broke down at 2 in the morning, or when he needed someone to co-sign his first apartment lease. I didn't mind. I genuinely didn't. He was my family, and he was lost without his mother. And I understood that in my bones because I watched what her death did to him. My grandmother pulled me aside at the funeral. She held both my hands and said, "Marcus doesn't have anyone else the way he has you. Don't let him fall apart." She passed 8 months later. I took that seriously, maybe too seriously. For the first few years it was manageable. I helped him with his security deposit when he moved into a nicer place. I lent him money twice when he was between jobs, once for $2,000, once for $3,500, and he paid both back, which made me trust him more than I should have. Then he met Sierra. I want to be precise about my first impression of Sierra, because in retrospect it was completely accurate, and I ignored it. She was charming. Like, aggressively charming. The kind of person who touches your arm when she laughs, and remembers the name of your cat, and compliments the specific thing you're most insecure about in a way that feels like a gift the first time, and like a calculated move the 10th time. She had opinions about everything, and she delivered them as facts. She was going to open a boutique fitness studio. She had a vision board. She talked about manifestation and passive income in the same breath. The first red flag I smoothed over in my own mind was the day she asked me within 40 minutes of our second meeting whether I owned my condo outright or had a mortgage. She framed it as curiosity. She said she was thinking about real estate investment. I answered honestly because I'm not a suspicious person by nature, and I watched her file that information away with a small, satisfied nod. Marcus was in love in the particular way that made him unreachable. You know that version of a person you love where they're so deep into a relationship that you can feel them changing frequencies, tuning out everything that isn't that one person? That was Marcus with Sierra. He thought she was brilliant. He repeated her ideas back to me like they were revelations. He started using words he'd never used before: aligned, intentional, vibrating at the right level. I kept my concerns to myself. It wasn't my relationship. The fitness studio idea evolved into a wellness and recovery spa concept, which I'll note, with some irony, is adjacent to my actual professional field. Sierra had done some research. She knew that recovery-focused studios were growing markets. She had a business plan in a Google Doc. She had a name, Restore Collective. She needed funding. This is where I have to be honest about my own choices, because I made them. Nobody forced me. Marcus came to me with the pitch 6 months into his relationship with Sierra. He was nervous, which made him sweet, which made me less guarded. He said Sierra had found a commercial space in a neighborhood that was genuinely up and coming. I'd seen it myself. New restaurants opening, good foot traffic. The lease was $4,200 a month. The build-out for the studio equipment, flooring, lighting, and treatment rooms was estimated at around $85,000. They had $45,000 combined between their savings and a small business loan Sierra had been pre-approved for. The gap was $40,000. They needed a cosigner on the commercial lease because neither of them had the credit profile the landlord required for a commercial space. Marcus asked if I would cosign and lend them the remaining $40,000 as a documented personal loan at 0 interest, to be paid back within 3 years. I said I needed to think about it. I spent 2 weeks thinking. I talked to my friend Renata, who is an accountant, and she walked me through the risks. I had a real estate attorney friend named James review the lease structure. I looked at Sierra's business plan carefully. It was actually a decent plan. The location was good. The concept was differentiated. Sierra had a background in fitness instruction and had managed a studio before. On paper, it made sense. I said yes. I want you to hear me when I say this. I went in with my eyes open. I had a signed loan agreement. My name was on the lease as a cosigner, which I understood meant I was on the hook if they defaulted. I had documentation. I thought I had protected myself adequately. What I had not protected myself from was Sierra. The build-out started in January. I wasn't involved in day-to-day decisions, which was by design. This was their business, and I was a silent financial backer, not a partner. But I started hearing things from Marcus in our occasional check-in calls that made me uneasy. The build-out was going over budget, not by a little. They'd upgraded the flooring. They'd added a sauna that wasn't in the original plan. Sierra had hired a brand designer for $8,000 to develop the visual identity before they'd even opened. They'd purchased equipment from a supplier Sierra's friend recommended, rather than the more affordable option in the original budget, because Sierra said you can't build a premium brand on cheap foundations. The gap between their budget and reality was growing, and somehow, in ways I still can't fully trace, this became a conversation about me. Sierra started joining Marcus's calls with me. At first she just listened, then she started contributing. Then Marcus mostly stopped talking, and Sierra ran the conversations. She was never overtly rude to me. That's the thing I keep coming back to. She was too smart for that. She framed everything as opportunity, as vision, as what's possible when we all commit fully. She asked me questions designed to make me feel like my hesitation was the only obstacle between their dream and reality. Don't you believe in Marcus? Don't you want to see this succeed? You have the capacity to do more, Dana. You know that, right? She wanted an additional $15,000 to cover the overages and complete the build. She presented it casually, the way you'd ask someone to pass the salt. I said I'd contributed what we agreed on, and I wasn't in a position to add more. She went quiet in a way that felt like a gear shifting. After that, things changed. Marcus became harder to reach. When I did get him on the phone, he was distracted, monosyllabic, clearly somewhere with Sierra listening. He started apologizing for things before I'd brought them up. I know it's been a lot. Sierra just has a big vision, which told me the conversations about me happening without me were not flattering. Sierra started commenting on my professional choices when they came up in conversation. Was I really maximizing my potential at a small outpatient clinic? Didn't I have a graduate degree? She said it with a smile, always, just sharp enough to land and soft enough to deny. I kept showing up anyway. For Marcus, because of my grandmother's hands holding mine. The breaking point started on a Tuesday afternoon in March. Marcus texted and asked if I could meet them at the studio space. They were doing a walkthrough and wanted my input. I thought this was a positive sign. Maybe they were course-correcting, wanting to include me. I cleared a patient appointment from my schedule and drove across town. When I arrived, the space was mostly finished. It actually looked impressive. High ceilings, clean lines, the equipment installed and staged well. Sierra had a good eye, whatever else was true. But Sierra wasn't in the mood for a friendly walkthrough. She had a list. There was a piece of equipment, a specialized percussive therapy device, top-of-the-line model that she'd seen at a competitor studio. She wanted 4 of them, approximately $3,200 each. She wanted me to purchase them as a co-investment in the business and accept repayment when the studio reached profitability. I told her that wasn't part of our agreement. She said our agreement was a starting point, and that business is fluid and people who were serious about success understood that. I said I was serious about boundaries and I'd been clear about mine. She said, and I want to be precise because I've replayed this. You have money sitting in accounts doing nothing while we're building something real. What is your problem? I told her the conversation was over. What happened next happened fast. I turned toward the storage area at the back of the studio where I'd left my bag when I came in. Sierra followed me. She was still talking, voice rising, telling me I was selfish, that Marcus deserved better, that I had used his mother's death to make myself feel important, without ever actually sacrificing anything. That one landed. I'll admit it. My throat tightened. I reached for my bag. Sierra grabbed my arm, not my bag, my arm, and when I pulled back, she shoved me, hard, into the metal shelving unit mounted to the wall. The edge of the shelf caught my forearm on the way down. I hit the concrete on my knees. The shelving unit held. I did not. I heard Marcus's voice from the front of the studio. I heard Sierra say, In a completely calm voice, she pulled away from me and lost her balance. I heard Marcus's footsteps slow, and then stop. And then, after a silence that lasted long enough for me to understand exactly who he had become, I heard the front door. His car started. He drove away. I sat on the floor of that storage room for a few minutes. My arm was bleeding steadily. My knees were scraped through my pants. I took inventory of myself the way you do when you're a healthcare worker, and you've switched into clinical mode, because it's the only thing standing between you and complete emotional collapse. The gash was deep enough to need stitches. Nothing felt broken. I was going to be fine. I found a roll of paper towels on the shelf above me. I pressed a thick wad against my arm. I picked up my bag. I walked out through the front of the studio. Sierra was standing near the reception desk, watching me with an expression I can only describe as measuring, and I got in my car. I drove to urgent care. 8 stitches. A tetanus shot because the shelf was old metal. A nurse named Patricia who handed me a juice box without being asked and said, "Honey, whatever happened, you didn't deserve it," in a tone that made me cry for exactly 90 seconds. I was still in the treatment room when Marcus's text came in. "You always make everything about yourself. Give Sierra some space. We need you to back off." I read it twice. I put my phone face down. I thought about my grandmother's hands. Then I thought about my name on a commercial lease. I thought about $40,000 documented in a signed loan agreement. I thought about what cosigner means in the legal sense, and what default means, and what the notice requirements were for withdrawing as a cosigner, which I happened to know, because James had explained them to me when I signed. I typed one word: fine. Then I called James. He picked up on the second ring. I explained what had happened, briefly and factually, the way you describe a clinical situation. He asked if I had documented the injury. I said I was sitting in urgent care with 8 stitches. He said that's documentation. He asked if there were any security cameras at the studio space. I said I didn't know, but the building had a camera above the rear entrance. I'd noticed it when I parked. He told me exactly what to do. I called the urgent care front desk from the same room and requested a full copy of my intake documentation, injury photographs, and treatment record. They printed it before I left. I went home. I sat at my kitchen table with my bandaged arm elevated on a pillow, and I wrote 2 emails. The first was to the commercial property management company. It was a formal written notice, with the exact contractual language James had provided, and that I was initiating the process of removing myself as cosigner from the commercial lease agreement. The lease included a 60-day notice clause for cosigner withdrawal. James had reminded me of this. I had 60 days from the date of notice. The second email was to my loan processor. I had structured the $40,000 as a formal personal loan through a documentation service, not a casual Venmo transfer invoking the default clause. The agreement specified that any act of physical harm by the borrower or their household members against the lender constituted grounds for immediate acceleration of the loan. Marcus and Sierra cohabited. Sierra had harmed me. I had written that clause myself, actually. James had suggested it, and I'd thought it was overly cautious at the time. I sent both emails at 11:47 p.m. Then I texted Marcus. "I've sent formal notice of my cosigner withdrawal and activated the default clause in our loan agreement. You'll receive documentation tomorrow. I'd recommend consulting an attorney." He didn't respond that night. Sierra responded. She texted from her own number at 12:23 a.m. "You are unbelievable. You're going to destroy everything we built because you're jealous and petty. This isn't over." I screenshot it, added it to the folder I'd started on my phone labeled, with perhaps more satisfaction than was strictly necessary, documentation. The building's property manager, it turned out, did have security footage from the interior camera that covered the rear section of the studio. James contacted them the next morning, explained there had been an incident involving potential physical harm, and requested preservation of the footage. They complied. They were, understandably, quite interested once they understood that one of the cosigners on their lease had been injured on the premises. The police report was filed 2 days later. The officer who took my statement was thorough and professional. The footage showed Sierra grabbing my arm. It showed me pulling back. It showed the shove. It showed Marcus standing in the doorway, watching, and then leaving. Sierra was charged with misdemeanor assault and battery. Marcus was not charged. But the officer noted in the report that he had witnessed the incident and left without rendering aid or calling emergency services. I want to tell you what happened with the lease and the loan, because I think it's the part that matters most, practically speaking. When I submitted the cosigner withdrawal notice, the property management company contacted Marcus and Sierra to inform them that under the lease terms, without a qualifying cosigner, they would need to either provide an alternate cosigner with equivalent credit profile within 60 days, or the lease would terminate. The studio was in their name. The liability was theirs. They couldn't find a replacement cosigner. Sierra's credit, it emerged, had issues that the original application hadn't fully captured. Marcus's income alone didn't meet the threshold. They had 60 days, and they spent most of them apparently trying to convince various people in their lives to take on the obligation and finding no takers. I heard some of this from my cousin Brianna, who is Marcus's other cousin from his father's side, and who had been watching the whole situation with increasing concern for months. She told me Marcus had called her asking if she would cosign. She had said no. She told me he cried. She said she felt terrible, but she'd seen what was happening, and she wasn't going to put herself in that position. I felt nothing in particular when she told me this. That surprised me, and then it didn't. The loan acceleration was a separate matter. The $40,000 was now due in full, which Marcus and Sierra did not have. The documentation service I'd used had a collections referral process. This is not a comfortable part of the story, and I won't pretend it felt good. But the money was mine. The agreement was clear, and I had 8 stitches and a police report. The studio never opened. They lost their deposit on the space, $12,500, when the lease terminated. The equipment they'd purchased was partially repossessed when the suppliers weren't paid out of the build-out budget, which had run out before completion. The brand designer kept her $8,000 because she'd completed her deliverables. They had a logo and a color palette for a studio that no longer existed. Sierra's assault charge was ultimately resolved through a diversion program first offense. No prior record. She paid a fine. She completed required hours. No conviction on her record, but the charge itself is documented. Marcus called me 5 weeks after the studio collapsed. I let it go to voicemail. He said he was sorry. He said he didn't know how things had gotten so far. He said he missed me, and he missed who we used to be. He said Sierra, and he were taking some time apart, which Brianna had already told me. I listened to the voicemail 3 times. Then I put my phone down and went to make dinner. Here is the thing I want you to understand, and I've spent a lot of time finding the right words for it. I didn't do any of this out of anger. By the time I sent those emails at midnight from my kitchen table, I was not angry. I was clear. There is a difference, and it matters. Anger is reactive. Clarity is just seeing what's true. What was true was that I had a legal agreement. What was true was that I had been physically harmed. What was true was that my name on that lease exposed me to liability for a business being run by people who had just demonstrated exactly how much they valued me. What was true was that doing nothing would not have been forgiveness. It would have been an invitation. My grandmother asked me to look after Marcus. I have thought about this a great deal since everything happened. I think she meant, don't let him feel alone. Be there when he needs someone. Show up. She did not mean, let him watch someone hurt you and drive away, and still protect him from consequences. Those are different things. It took me a long time to understand they were different things. I am not currently in contact with Marcus. I don't know what the future holds for that. I'm not making permanent declarations about what I'll do in a year or 2 years. I know that grief and love are complicated, and that people can change. What I know for right now is this. I have my documentation folder. I have 8 stitches that have since healed into a thin scar on my forearm. I have Renata, who came over the night I got home from urgent care, and sat with me until midnight, eating leftover Thai food, and not requiring me to be okay. I have James, who took my calls and sent his invoices and treated me like someone worth protecting. I have Brianna, who said no when she needed to say no, and then called to check on me anyway. I have Patricia, the urgent care nurse who handed me a juice box. And I have a voicemail I've listened to 3 times that I haven't yet decided what to do with. That's where things stand. That's the whole story. If you're watching this and you have your name on anything, a lease, a loan, a contract for someone who has stopped treating you like you matter, I want you to go read that document tonight. Find the clauses. Know your rights. Know your exit. Not because you should expect the worst. Because knowing what you can do is not the same as doing it. It just means you have a choice. I had a choice. I made mine.